Thank you all so much. Can you all hear me okay? Great. I'm so excited to be here and to be invited to speak in front of you all about an artist's guide to the AI landscape, legal and ethical considerations for using generative AI. This is a topic not necessarily to artists that I present about, but I became somewhat of an accidental AI ethicist over the last 18 months or so. And so I presented on this topic to data scientists, to lawyers, to NGOs, state governments, courts. And so I'm really happy to be standing here in front of artists who will actually appreciate the slides, hopefully. So for our agenda today, I'm going to give you a brief introduction of myself, but really, really brief. It's really just so that I can show you a piece of AI art that I created, and that'll be the only piece of AI art you'll see this whole time. Then we'll do some common vocabulary. I'll talk a little bit about the basics of how generative artificial intelligence works. Then we're going to talk about the state of the law, except for there's no T in copyright, but it's not copyright, it's copyright, so there's my first mistake, thank you very much. Some ethical considerations for both you as artists and also just generally systemic. A couple of takeaways and reflections, and if we have time, some Q&A, because I know we're just a little bit behind schedule. If you have any questions, you can hold them till the end. You can ask them, it's free form, whatever you'd like to do. So I'm Jordan Jefferson, director of Lynne L. Pantalena Law Library, and I'm an associate professor of law. For the last 10 or so years, I've worked in emerging technologies, in legal research and legal education, and I currently teach a course called Understanding AI, Promises and Pitfalls in the Legal Profession. We delve into the world of generative AI technologies through the lens of their applications in the practice of law. However, like I said, in addition to this course, I also present on generative AI technologies, ethics, and pedagogy. I also teach legal research, information literacy, and mal, mis, and disinformation in the law. So, I did not make this image. Well, I generated this image, or I used a tool to generate this image. And so, why would I do that at a conference geared toward visual artists? Because I'm not an artist. I have zero artistic ability, even in stick figure form. And I wanted to see if I could get the system to mimic a very famous painting that I've always thought, or a very famous piece of art, that I thought would be great on this slide, which was Rockwell's famous triple self-portrait. My initial prompt to DALL-E, which is OpenAI's ChatGPT's image generator, is on this slide. Can you help me produce an image for a conference I'm presenting at? The title is An Artist's Guide to the AI Landscape, Legal and Ethical Considerations for Using Gen AI. Can this image incorporate a robot artist painting or drawing a self-portrait that looks like a human in the style of Rockwell's triple self-portrait? Its response was interesting, and it's different than something you would have gotten about 18 months ago. Its response was, no. I can't replicate or mimic Norman Rockwell's triple self-portrait directly due to copyright considerations. Let me just tell you, 18 months ago that was not there. However, I can create an image inspired by the idea of a robot artist engaging in self-reflection with a whimsical classic art style reminiscent of mid-20th century illustration. If anyone were to describe Rockwell, I think they might say whimsical art style, right? It took several iterations of my prompt to actually get what you see before you. And it isn't great. Anyone pick out anything that can maybe immediately identify that this is not something that I might have created using a computer or my own hand? Go ahead, shout it out.
Like, why is there an extra palette on the table? Why are there paintbrushes on the wall?
Giant paintbrushes?
Yeah.
Giant paper. It's not great at perspective. It doesn't quite understand. Go ahead, keep going.
Oh, is that supposed that smear, the blue smear, supposed to be its hand holding the palette?
Yeah. So it's still not very great. This particular system was made with DALL-E 3. We're now at DALL-E 4, and there's lots of other systems out there that do very different things. I just happened to be in ChatGPT at the time, so I was going to use it. There's a lot of little things that indicate to us that maybe an artist didn't create this from their own hand. I used the tool that I had. And I'm opening with this and my lack of creative process to highlight how Gen AI can be used as a tool and a support, but not to supplement the creative or supplant the creative process. So let's move into some definitions. I like to start these presentations with common vocabulary because some of these terms we've heard before, but maybe we don't know exactly how they work in the broader context of generative AI. And I like for all of us, I'm a lawyer, I like for all of us to have the same plain meaning when we're having these conversations together. So I've got a couple of slides that is heavy text, so if you're not a heavy text person, sorry about that. Artificial intelligence is just technology programmed to think like humans and mimic their action. There is nothing intelligent about generative AI at this stage. These tools are built to make predictions and recognize patterns in order to generate content. No creativity or thought is required other than the computer scientists who programmed and trained the algorithms or models. Data. Data is just digital information used to train and inform AI models. This is text, images, videos, other forms of media, as well as personally identifiable information, but we're not quite there yet. A model is just a mathematical framework that makes decisions, predictions, or generates output by learning from data based on patterns it's recognized in its training. And training is just feeding the model data and adjusting its parameters so it learns to recognize those patterns, predict outcomes, and generate responses. All of that together is how we generate texts or images using one of these tools. There are many kinds of artificial intelligence. We are focusing on generative AI today, but we have extractive AI, which analyzes and extracts specific information for patterns directly from raw data, such as text or images, without altering or changing the original content. So think when you play a song on Spotify and you get the lyrics, that's extractive AI. Or when anyone here still use Google, you might get a search result snippet, kind of, not the AI one, not that one, but about 6 months ago it would give you a little answer. That's extractive AI. Generative AI, we just talked about this a little bit, learns from examples and training and then creates something new. And I hesitate to use the term create. It generates something new, like stories or pictures or music. Predictive AI analyzes data patterns to make forecasts or anticipate future outcomes and predicts trends or behaviors based on past information. So what shows you might like based on what you've seen before, what you might buy based on what you've purchased before. That's predictive AI. And then finally, this sort of newer thing is agentive AI, which is just what it sounds like. It's an agent that works for you based on your desires and what you've told it to do. Anyone have a smart thermostat? My house is old. I live in New England. I do not have a smart thermostat. But let's say every day when you get home, you want it set at 74 degrees, so every day you set it at 74, and then all of a sudden, it's just 74. That's agentive. So now that we have a common vocabulary, let's take a look under the hood and talk a little bit about the basics of how these tools work. But before we get there, when I tell people that AI is thousands of years old, I get really funny looks. But it is. The idea of artificial intelligence is not new. And it has been embedded in the human narrative for thousands of years. It reflects humanity's ongoing fascination and concern with the concept of autonomous creations, our hopes for innovation versus our fears of technology potentially surpassing human control. So I picked out these specific examples just because they kind of run the gamut in our timeline. So we start with Talos in Greek myth. The myth describes Talos as a giant bronze man built by the Greek god Hephaestus. He was commissioned by Zeus to protect the island of Crete from invaders. He marched around the island 3 times a day and hurled boulders at any approaching enemy ships. That was his directive. That was his algorithm. he was defeated ultimately and could do other things, but he was a giant robot. Then we move to the Middle Ages where we have golems. Golems are animated anthropomorphic beings from Jewish folklore, entirely created out of inanimate matter, usually mud or clay, and they were brought forth by words of belief. It's sort of a low-tech robot, and often in these stories they're used to protect, and sometimes they break out of the control of the person who made them and wreak a little bit of havoc. We move out of the Middle Ages, and we move into the 19th century. Like Frankenstein's monster, artificial beings, these concepts of artificial beings and thinking machines were developed in fiction. So Dr. Frankenstein, for example, or Dr. Frankenstein's monster, for example, was driven by human innovation. And it touches on these themes of intelligence and consequences. And a lot of the themes that were used in the 1900s to decry Shelley's book are still used today about the dangers of scientific overreach. And then finally, robots. Fun party story if anybody wants it. The word robot entered our vernacular in about 1920 from a Czech play called Rozum's Universal Robots. It originates from a word robota, meaning work. The idea that some kind of artificial intelligence may supplant humankind as the dominant intelligent species on the planet is a very common theme in dystopian science fiction. And again, sort of runs through the conversation about artificial intelligence today. But AI is not only not new in general, it's also not new in our daily life. So we use predictive and extractive AI for the last 30 plus years. How many people have social media? How many people see the things that they want to see on social media and maybe not the other things that they don't want to see on social media, right? That's predictive AI running in the background. There's a lot of other things happening, but there's a predictive AI element running in the background. We just talked about online shopping and your predictions and your suggestions. Digital assistants, I'm not going to say either of their names or any of their names because all of our phones will light up and it'll be terrible. But that's extractive AI. They're not creating anything new other than their own voices. They're just searching the internet for you. Biometrics is machine learning algorithms comparing your face or your fingerprint. Fun bit, Apple stores about 3,000 separate data points about your face in its bank, so in case you were wondering. You've got maps, email, searching, curation, all of that is run by some form of predictive or extractive, and now, to a certain extent, in your email, your searches, generative AI. So if it's existed for this long, and we've been using it for so long, why now? Why the ruckus? And that's because now we're talking about generative AI. And the Gen AI landscape today was made possible by a few things. The convergence of vast amounts of data, which AI models use to learn, increased computational powers, we go like this and we go like that, which enables machines to process this data quickly and efficiently, and then we have advanced algorithms which allow AI to recognize patterns and perform complex tasks. If we started from Ada Lovelace and kind of worked this way, there was a big data, like everyone was data driven in the 2010s, and we kind of hit here. And once we had all of this data, once the internet was so giant, and once we started doing everything online, the amount of data that we had equaled what we needed to be able to move the conversation about artificial intelligence forward. Generative artificial intelligence was actually introduced in the 1950s at Dartmouth, but we could never get to here, and at that point, computers existed in rooms this size. So we didn't actually have what we needed to get to the science, and now we do. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's where we are. So, how does all this work together? All right, we know, because I've said it repeatedly and probably something you already knew, is that generative AI creates these texts and images by learning patterns from vast data sets. What are those data sets? Nobody really knows. They weren't purchased, although some of it is. If it's personal information, your personal information, my personal information, is bought and sold for pennies on the dollar, all day, every day. So if it's doing personal information, but it's also ebooks, articles. The lawsuit against Google's Gemini showed us that part of their data set was outbound Reddit votes, Reddit links with 3 or more upvotes. Anyone use Reddit? I do. And so does my 37-year-old brother, and I love him, but I don't necessarily want my machines learning from the things that he's interested in. So there was a lot of information, but not a lot of curation. And what basically that data is put into a large language model, which is a type of model that uses something called machine learning to execute its tasks. We also have predictive models and extractive models and generative models that don't have text. We have lots of different types of models. So if you see something that says LLM or large language model, all it means is that it is using data and learning how to predict outcomes and generate text. And machine learning is the overall method for our LLM. And it involves showing the model lots of data so it can learn patterns and make predictions. If we want it to write a Shakespearean sonnet, we are going to feed it Shakespearean sonnets and maybe derivatives thereof. If we want it to identify cat pictures, we're gonna feed it a whole bunch of cat pictures. The interesting part comes when you don't feed it enough types of data, and so you get some bias in your results, and we'll talk about that in a second. But let's say you only fed it pictures of white and black cats. It would not be able to identify an orange cat, even at this stage. LLMs use something called natural language processing to generate that human-like text and those images. And all that is it focuses on understanding how these connections are made in human patterns of speech. So these components work together to create something new. Or again, create is not a word I love. Generate something new, like music, or drafting an article, or an image, or anything, but it's only doing it based on patterns that it's learned from previous data. Essentially, we're teaching the model to generate based on examples that it's learned from. Okay. So, there's a T in that one. So there we go. Fantastic. These tools are here. They're not going anywhere. They're billion-dollar industries at this point. All we can do is sort of understand our role and how to recognize the pros and the cons, the benefits and the detriments with using these tools. So I'm focusing on copyright here because there have been upwards of 500, maybe even 1,000 laws introduced at the state level, state and territory level over the last, since about 24, 25, a little bit in 23. We have only one federal law that deals with generative AI. Well, we have two. One sort of put together a sort of generative AI task force. The other one deals with images, likeness rights, and is focused specifically on like child sex abuse materials and using people's faces to generate deepfakes. But it doesn't really talk about, like, there have been very few, there's no federal law about your right as an artist, or a writer's right as an artist, or a musician's right. So we're gonna focus a little bit on the really amorphous state of copyright law currently. So as professional artists, I'm assuming most of you are pretty familiar with copyright, right? Which is the right to copy, specifically a property right in an original work of authorship, literary, musical, dramatic, choreographic, pictorial, graphic, sculptural, and architectural works, motion pictures and other audiovisual works, and sound recordings. All of that had to be added at various points as technology moved through. And this is fixed in any tangible medium of expression, giving the holder exclusive right to produce, adapt, distribute, perform, and display the work. Copyright is also the same word that we use for the body of law. So there's no difference between when we talk about the law of copyright and how we talk about copyright. So this is legal protection, original works of authorship fixed in a tangible medium. Gives you a right to do certain things with it, and only you can do certain things with it because you're the author. And you do not have to register your copyright. It subsists the instant that your work is fixed in that tangible medium. However, if you want to sue, if you want to say someone violated your copyright, the registering it is important. So, I have copyrighted works. Is it lawful for these tools to train on and generate from my copyrighted content? Maybe. It's not a really good answer, and I'm very sorry. Artists argue that basically the training, so all of that data that it's learning, these tools are learning from, that is a violation of their copyright. Because nobody asked, nobody paid. They just scraped the internet, maybe took pictures. I mean, just a show of hands, how many people have their work available either for sale or for display online? Okay. APIs and bots are crawling the internet every day, all day, every day. It's really creepy. It's always in the background. We never know about it. You don't know if your material has been used in one of these data sets. And so we argue, artists, I say we, I'm not an artist. Remember, zero artistic ability. Artists argue that this is a copyright infringement, whereas companies are arguing that this training is more akin to learning patterns rather than making reproductions, right? So far, the US courts have been kind of split, and not necessarily split in the way that we think that some courts are going this way and some courts are going that way. I'm not using split in the legal sense. They're just not sure. This is a very big deal, and I think the last time something like this happened was probably movies, maybe computer animated movies. I'm really not sure. This is an evolving and very high stakes legal frontier. So, what are people arguing? What are the companies arguing? Because you're arguing violation of my copyright. You are not allowed to do any of these things because I have copyright in my work. And they're arguing something called fair use. Do we know, have we had to use fair use before, right? Okay. So they're saying that copyright content is fair use, and that is basically a legal exception to the copyright law. It exists in our laws to allow certain types of reproduction, certain types of uses that the courts and federal government have found useful and productive, such as commentary or criticism, news reporting, education, parody. We wouldn't have Weird Al if we didn't have fair use, which is like a big deal in my household. I've got a 14-year-old. Or transformative art. And that's the one that we find most of these tech companies kind of arguing. Because we're not creating, we are generating, we are transforming. So, courts evaluate using 4 factors. Basically, the purpose and character of the use. Is it transformative? Was the use of your copyrighted material the way that the company is using it? Did it transform your work? Was there a commercial incentive? or is it nonprofit? This is where like my own personal lawyering is like, they're making billions of dollars, people. But also you can't stop the machine as much as you want to, so. What's the nature of the original work? Factual versus highly creative. Highly creative, it's harder to kind of argue fair use. How much? The amount and substantiality. How much was used? And how much of your work was used, and how central was that use to the product or the generated content? And finally, the effect on the market. Okay, does this replace the original or harm its value? I'm not sure anybody would buy my robot art for multiple millions of dollars in the same way that they would buy Rockwell's triple self-portrait, but who knows? One of the interesting things on the effect on the market, anybody watch John Oliver? I don't have the right to say that, so. He just did a really great piece on something called AI slop, which is basically AI being used to create just utter nonsense. It's also a term used when AI is generating AI, and it's generating content, and that content is feeding itself. It's sort of like Ouroboros, right? It's just eating itself whole. So pretty soon the market might actually just be full of not particularly good information or images or music, because it's like taking a reproduction of a reproduction of a reproduction, right? So back to this. AI companies claim that their tools transform the input, basically the data, into something new that cannot and will not compete with the originals. Now, like I said, about 18 months ago, I very much could have gotten a Rockwell. Now they're like, oh no, if I do that, I will get sued by Norman Rockwell's family. Like, and I obviously can't snap either. There we go, like that. So they pulled back a little bit, they tweaked their training models, and so, but you can still get it to generate. I had one of my students in my class asked it to generate a yellow square, sponge-like, that lived under the sea and wore blue pants and a tie. I wonder what it generated. Now, it didn't use DALL-E, they used Midjourney for that. But absolutely 100% gave us exactly what we all possibly, yeah.
Does that copyright notice come up if you used any artist as a reference, or is it only the high-profile ones?
So, I don't know because I'm not sure. Like I've done this twice. Once with Eric Carle, and once with Norman Rockwell. I imagine that the higher profile of the artist, the copyright notice. I would imagine, this is just my assumption, if you put an artist's name in the style of, what's your name?
Natalia.
Natalia. Yeah. In the style of Natalia, that it would say, no, I can't do that. But I can give you something that mimics what Natalia might do in this situation. And then we could see how close that is. That to me just is, from like the computer science side, that would just be an easy way of training the model to not violate copyright right away. But I don't know how effective that notice really is. And that's one of the things that's being litigated in court right now. Yeah.
Part of the copyright is also that you have ways to protect people from creating derivative work.
That's right. Yes.
So why does that not apply in this case?
Because they're arguing transformative as opposed to derivative. So they're saying that
Tomatoes.
6 of one, half a dozen of another. They're arguing it's fair use because it transforms the work, and because when I talk about these data sets, I'm talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of images, if not billions. We know there are billions and billions of pieces of text called tokens, billions and billions and billions and billions of tokens being used for them to recognize patterns. So these images, it would be very hard for you as an artist, and this is one of the things they're banking on, it's one of the things that these companies are banking on is it's really hard for the Natalias of the world, the Jordans of the world, to say, that's mine. That's exactly my work. And you violated my copyright.
You know, you mentioned the Rockwells and famous well-known works, and that would be maybe now a more common response that this is copyrighted. But in a lot of our creation tools, we can put in the metadata that this is copyrighted by me.
Yep.
And so are these AI, I mean, obviously those AI tools can read that metadata.
Yes.
Is that now becoming a prompt response because of that metadata coded in my work?
Quite possibly, depending on how the data is disambiguated, right? So the whole thing is supposed to be anonymous,
Part of the engine.
right? So the data is supposed to be anonymized. Whether or not that actually happens, and you can actually look and ask, do you have any of my things? Can you show it to me? You can opt out as well from these tools, and the tools learning from you and using your materials. It takes a really long time, and it's a lot of effort. You have to go through each and every one. Do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I do. I wanted to ask too on that thread, like
Sure.
some of it with some of these companies are black box, like you
Oh,
can't
they're
ask. And then some, like I work on a model with a government contractor, and it's explainable AI.
Yeah.
So you could start, to Kim's question, start to see the transparency of the data that it's training on. So with what you're talking about as the law sort of making, because I don't know law, you do, making a distinction between explainable AI and these corporate black boxes to try to hold it accountable for what it's scraping through our metadata.
That is such a good question. I love that question. Okay, I'm gonna
I
pinpoint.
know it's a big question,
No. I'm gonna pinpoint one word that you said, which was government. Government there's what, I'm gonna say this broadly. The United States government versus, let's say, the EU or China or Latin America. If you received government funds, you had a requirement that you must be able to share out your findings and your data. There was a transparency requirement. Now, the argument against the transparency requirement for, let's say, Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, any of the hundreds of thousands of companies who are putting these things together, these tech companies who are doing this now, is that is going to impede innovation and dilute my market share. Now, there's some things that you can see, so you can run these models in deep research mode. I don't know if anyone's done that yet using DeepSeek or ChatGPT-4o, but you can run these things in deep research and see the thought processes. Now, it happens in a split second, 5 seconds tops. So unless you're really looking for it and you know how to read code, it's very hard to find. So yes, if I was developing a system and I was getting federal funds for it, or I was in the EU where they have much stricter privacy and transparency requirements, there would be more of a push for that. Although some states, some states, like I want to say it's North Dakota, don't quote me, are actually pushing for that because these tools are being used to generate things that are causing harm to their constituents, right? Some people are using them as mental health professionals. Some people are using these tools to generate pornographic materials featuring their exes. Some of them are being used to create schemes and scams that can get people to send lots of money to people who don't deserve that money. And so knowing how these tools work is one way to force accountability. I don't think you will ever see that for the larger models. We don't have that kind of system here in the United States. There was in a recently passed piece of federal legislation, the OBBB, originally had a 10-year moratorium on all state laws regulating AI. Luckily, at the last minute before it was voted on, that was pulled out in a 99-1 vote. So states can still regulate and force these companies to kind of meet requirements if they're going to do business in their state. Just real quick, kind of two big cases that have been recently settled. One does not go the artist's way. There was a case in June against Anthropic, who runs Claude, and basically said that Anthropic's, and I'm a librarian, so this hurts, Anthropic's use of books, both copyrighted and in the public domain, was extremely transformative and therefore qualified for fair use under US law. Whereas another thing that is very timely for me, Thomson Reuters versus Ross, this is a legal research platform, that court found in favor of another big multi-conglomerate company, but they had trade secret. And Ross was learning from their trade secret, was learning from their own intellectual property. And they said that was not fair use. So, let's talk a little bit about pros and cons and ethical considerations. There's some pros. Creative expansion. These tools can help you kind of visualize in ways that you can't. It helped me create something that I would never, ever, ever be able to create. I had an idea. I love art. I go to museums all the time. I've seen art. I appreciate art. I'm a professional appreciator. I love music, love art, love theater. Can't do any of it. I can bake a chocolate chip cookie and that's about it. But it can help kind of create and expand and maybe move forward a little bit. There's also accessibility and efficiency. I have a cognitive brain disease, or I have a cognitive disability and a degenerative brain disease. One of the reasons you saw me reading my notes. I have ChatGPT open almost all the time. And my daughter actually just told me about another tool that I could use. I have trouble finding words. It makes being smart on command very hard. But if I'm in the middle of class and I forget a word, I can just tell ChatGPT, what's the word for the big, cold silver thing that's in my kitchen? Refrigerator. Thank you. So these kind of tools can help artists who have cognitive disabilities or physical disabilities, or maybe limited physical resources, to kind of create more independently. And new medium, new opportunities. AI can be a collaborator, right? Some artists are actually using AI as their medium now. So it's a whole new world. Maybe it's a brave new world. Then there's the not so good, right? We didn't consent to this. Nobody asked us. Just because it's good for the company doesn't necessarily mean it's good for all of humanity. Then we have the attribution and ownership thing. If you are using generative AI to create, there's a rule, the copyright rule says, AI-generated works must have sufficient human authorship to be protected. So it's in a legal gray zone. How much is sufficient? And then the devaluation of skill. Clients may opt for faster, cheaper AI over human work, which undermines your labor and your training. Then there's a few other things. We've already talked about some of these. But these are the more sort of beyond the impact to you as artists. There are systemic ethical considerations to take into account, such as we talked a little bit about bias and discrimination. AI models are trained by humans. That data is supposedly looked at by humans. So if the model has bias, the results will have bias. We also have misinformation, deep fakes. These technologies create highly realistic, convincing fake content. Right? It is hard now to know whether or not you are looking at a real beach scene or an AI-generated beach scene. And these technologies are only getting better. Today is the worst these technologies will ever be. There's data privacy and cybersecurity issues, right? We can, generative AI can inadvertently expose sensitive personal information because these data sets are vast and not anonymized as well as they should be. They can also be targeted by cyber attacks that can exploit things for malicious purposes. We talked about malicious automation, we talked about accountability, environmental impact. This is the one that I sort of bring it up towards the end because it's like a super big bummer, but it's also very, very real, right? The extensive computational power we talked about, that's required to train and run these sophisticated Gen AI models contributes to significant energy, water consumption, water use, and carbon emissions, okay? So Google brought 6 nuclear reactors. They have private nuclear reactors. And all over this country, in mostly rural areas, there are data centers being built. It's estimated by 2026 that these data centers will use the amount of energy that Japan uses in a year. That's a big deal. And it also has an impact on the local area in which these data centers are built, right? Again, rural areas, because they have lots of land, not necessarily because they have lots of water and power and infrastructure. And these data centers aren't hiring the local community. They're just big black boxes in the middle of the desert. Finally, this one, the atrophy of skill and creativity. Just recently, not recently, about 2 weeks ago, which means that everyone's forgotten it, if they even knew about it. There was an article that came out that basically said, using ChatGPT makes you dumber. That, too long, didn't read, using ChatGPT makes you dumber. Now, it's not exactly what it was saying, and it's not, there's been some arguments for and against, but over-reliance on AI, generating content, solving problems, has the capacity to diminish human creativity and critical thinking skills. How many people use a calculator instead of doing their taxes by hand, right? Is it a degeneration or is it a shift in our skill set? Who knows? There's an argument. So a couple of takeaways here. Your work may be used to train AI models without your consent. You can opt out of these things. It's really hard to do it, but every one of the large AI tool, every tool has a privacy setting, and you can go in and see what they have. AI-generated works may not be copyrightable if a human didn't meaningfully guide the output. The legal landscape is unsettled at best. Yeah?
This is a general question.
Sure.
Obviously, everything is changing at an exponential
Mhm.
pace. What kind of resources do we have as artists to try to at least keep up a little bit?
Oh.
with that?
So the question was what kind of resources to keep up. So I follow someone by the name of Ethan Mollick. And I find his view, Ethan and Lila Mollick, they write a blog, they talk about how these tools are moving, how you can use them, which one's the best for what. He also wrote a book called Co-Intelligence. I have no connection to this man or this book, and I think it's actually just a really easy, palatable way to sort of jump in to learning about AI. I have a couple of websites that are tracking, like if you're interested in the legal aspects, that are tracking the legal aspects. But this is the kind of thing that I teach this and I'm not up on it. It's so hard to keep up on. Finally, AI is a tool, not a replacement for human creativity, judgment, or lived experience. So some things for you all to think about. Is this tool enhancing my creativity or replacing it? Am I using content or styles that belong to others, and would I want mine used in the same way? How can I remain transparent about when and how I use AI in my practice if I do at all? And do I want to actively resist, reshape, or embrace AI in my work, and why? So if you're planning on or you do use AI in any reasons, I suggest kind of taking some time to reflect on these. I think it's a useful exercise. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
So I think there's an important distinction, what you opened with, on one level is like, oh, well, we've moved forward a little bit here, the software says no, that's copyrightable. I think as illustrators, the idea of AI reproducing a specific piece isn't the fear.
No.
What it did was, in fact, if like, I'd be curious if the prompts were specifically about in the style of, not in the style of a specific piece of art, but in the style of
a nature
the
artist,
and
right.
how it would respond, because that is really the concern. as an illustrator, you know, as you pointed out, clients may likely be happy to go with a cheaper, faster way to get to imagery, especially when they begin to be able to, if we cannot keep them from doing this idea that they would basically be in the style of Britt Griswold. And, you know, then Britt kind of loses some work.
That's,
You know, and so my suggestion is that as you and people like yourself that are doing the research in this, I think that is a really concerning thing. Reproducing a specific piece of
No.
art, especially a museum art,
Right.
is not really the concern.
oh, absolutely, and as a librarian, I was actually saying this to a few people, Virgin few people. My job has been threatened by technology every 15 years, 5 to 15 years, right? Google came, librarians are obsolete. ChatGPT is here, librarians and research are obsolete. I think part of it goes to the human connection and the human interaction. So like I said, it took me 7 iterations to get that single piece. Now that's not too many, probably took me a total of 15 minutes, but at a certain point, the machine started to break down and that was the best it could give me. I don't know what the technology is going to look like in 2 years, 5 years, 30 days. But right now, it's not smart. It gets confused, and it's very easy for it to not give the client exactly what they want, whereas you can. And the human component, the human interaction, is going to be what I think people are looking for, what people want to engage with. Because these tools, no matter how good you prompt, how well you prompt, it's not going to give you exactly what you want. But you're not wrong, right? You're not wrong. This definitely is going to have an impact on, like, I'm both a librarian and a lawyer, and people are like, oh, lawyers are dead. No need for lawyers anymore because we can just put every answer in here except for ChatGPT was trained on 0.0000002% of legal information. It's trained on a lot more artistic information than it was on legal information. Anyone else? Time, we're done.
We're done.
We're done, but if anyone has any questions, I'll be sort of over here.